Chapter 1. The Scent of Death. The air in the laundry sector didn't just smell, it assaulted the senses. It was a suffocating cocktail of industrial bleach, lye, damp rot, and the sour musk of 1,000 unwashed bodies. For anyone else, it was hell. For Celestia, it was camouflage. She plunged her hands into the scalding gray water, her knuckles raw and red. The steam rose up to slick back the loose strands of hair escaping her headscarf. She scrubbed the coarse fabric of a warrior's tunic, the rhythmic shk of the brush against the washboard acting as a meditation. Keep your head down, scrub the blood out, don't look up. If she scrubbed hard enough, maybe she could forget that her blood didn't run red like the stain on the linen. Maybe she could forget that beneath the oversized, stained rags she wore, her skin hummed with a heritage that could get her killed before her next breath. Please, I didn't mean to. The high-pitched, desperate cry shattered her rhythm. Celestia froze, soap suds dripping from her wrists. The noise came from the alley behind the drying racks, a blind spot where the guards often went to smoke and shirk their duties. Didn't mean to? A deeper, slurred voice mocked, followed by the wet thud of a boot connecting with ribs. You exist, cripple. That's offense enough. Celestia closed her eyes. Not my business. Stay invisible. Another cry. This one strangled, as if air were being crushed out of small lungs. The brush in Celestia's hand snapped in half. She stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. Her ash-gray eyes, dull and lifeless by design, sharpened for a fraction of a second. She grabbed the heavy wooden bucket of rinse water, filthy, soapy, and slick, and moved silently toward the drying racks. The scene in the alley was pathetic. 2 low-ranking guards, reeking of cheap ale and boredom, were taking turns kicking a ball of rags curled up in the mud. Milo. The boy was barely 14, scrawny, with a twisted left leg that dragged behind him like a dead weight. He was curled into a fetal position, clutching a tattered leather notebook to his chest as if it were a shield. Give it here, the taller guard growled, reaching down to snatch the book. Let's see what the little rat is scribbling. Probably love letters to the Alpha, eh? Milo bit the guard's hand. The guard howled, snatching his hand back. You little piece of filth! He raised his boot, aiming for the boy's head. A killing blow, or at least one that would leave permanent brain damage. Celestia didn't shout. She didn't unleash the power coiling in her gut like a sleeping dragon. She simply hurled the contents of the bucket. A wave of soapy, greased water splashed across the cobblestones right under the guard's plant foot. Friction vanished. The laws of physics took over. The guard's leg shot out from under him. He hit the ground with a bone-jarring crack, his head bouncing off the stone. He groaned, eyes rolling back, dazed. The second guard spun around, hand reaching for the knife at his belt. Who the hell? Celestia was already moving. She didn't fight like a brawler. She moved like a surgeon. She stepped into his space, her small body deceptive in the baggy clothes. As he fumbled for his weapon, she drove 2 stiff fingers into the soft hollow just beneath his ear. The vagus nerve. The guard's eyes went wide. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His nervous system short-circuited, knees buckling as he collapsed into the mud next to his groaning friend. Silence returned to the alley, save for the dripping of soapy water. Celestia exhaled slowly, her heart rate barely elevated. She looked down at Milo. The boy was staring at her, eyes wide with shock, still clutching his book. Can you stand? She asked, her voice raspy from disuse. Milo nodded, wincing as he shifted his weight. I think so. As he moved, the notebook slipped from his grasp and fell open in the mud. Celestia crouched to retrieve it before the water ruined the pages. She meant to close it immediately, but the image on the open page stopped her cold. It wasn't a doodle. It wasn't a child's drawing. It was a topographical map of the Northern Ridge patrol route. but it was annotated with charcoal markings that made Celestia's blood run cold. He had marked the wind tunnels where scent would carry furthest. He had circled 3 specific ravine choke points, places where a small force could slaughter a battalion. Kill zones. She looked from the page to the crippled boy shivering in the mud. He hadn't just drawn a map. He had designed a defensive slaughter. "You drew this?" she whispered. Milo flinched, expecting a reprimand. I just like looking at the land. The patterns, they make sense." "The guards called you useless," Celestia murmured, handing the book back with a reverence she usually reserved for medical texts. "They are fools." Before Milo could answer, the air changed. It wasn't a sound. It was a pressure drop. The birds in the nearby trees went silent. The wind died. A static charge prickled across Celestia's skin, raising the fine hairs on her arms. Then came the smell. It hit Celestia before the monster appeared. Burning wood, stale liquor, and beneath it all, a scent that made her stomach turn over. Sweet, cloying, and terrifyingly familiar. Golden nightshade. "Hide!" Celestia hissed, shoving Milo behind a stack of rotting crates. "But now!" A low, guttural growl vibrated through the soles of her boots. From the shadows of the forest edge, a creature emerged. It was Ragnar, or what was left of him. The alpha of the Blackthorn pack was a giant of a man, but he was currently trapped in a nightmare between forms. His jaw was distended, unhinged, with long canine teeth tearing through his human lips. His fingers were elongated claws, black and hooked. His shirt lay in tatters, revealing a chest heaving with exertion, veins bulging black against his skin. He didn't look at the unconscious guards. He looked at Celestia. His eyes were glowing a hellish crimson, devoid of recognition. Foam dripped from his mouth, sizzling slightly as it hit the snow. "Alpha!" One of the dazed guards on the ground moaned, trying to sit up. Ragnar moved with a speed that defied his size. He didn't just attack, he dismantled. One backhand sent the guard flying into the brick wall of the laundry house with a wet crunch. Celestia stood frozen. She knew this state. She had seen it in the royal dungeons. This wasn't just madness, it was a biological overload. His wolf and his human side were fighting for dominance, fueled by a toxin designed to drive the victim insane before the heart exploded. Ragnar turned his head, sniffing the air. The crimson eyes locked onto Celestia. He snarled, a sound of pure, predatory agony, and crouched to spring. Celestia didn't run. She couldn't outrun an alpha, even a broken one. Instead, she inhaled deeply, dissecting the scent radiating off him. That sweet, floral rot, golden nightshade. It was a poison that only grew in the deepest, darkest gardens of the royal palace. A poison used by the High Council to torture political prisoners, to break their minds so they could be controlled. The realization hit her harder than any physical blow. He isn't crazy. Celestia stared into the monstrous face of the man about to kill her, and for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something other than fear. She felt kinship. He is being hunted. Just like me. Chapter 2. The Blood Oath. The Alpha's study was less a room and more a cage for a beast. The heavy oak furniture had been reduced to splinters, and deep gouges scarred the stone walls, evidence of claws seeking purchase on reality. The air here was heavy, thick with the pheromones of aggression and the metallic tang of dried blood. 2 guards threw Celestia onto the Persian rug. She landed hard on her hands and knees, biting her tongue to suppress a cry. "She was at the laundry site, Alpha," one guard reported, voice trembling. "We found her standing over the bodies." A low growl emanated from the darkest corner of the room. "Leave." "But sir, your condition—" "I said leave." The roar rattled the window panes. The guards didn't hesitate. They scrambled out, slamming the heavy iron-reinforced door behind them. The lock clicked, sealing Celestia in the tomb. She slowly lifted her head. Ragnar stood by the fireplace, his back to her. He was shirtless, his skin slick with a feverish sweat. The transformation had receded, but not fully. His spine was twisted, vertebrae protruding sharply, and his hands were still dark, clawed nightmares twitching at his sides. He turned. His face was a mask of raw suffering. The red in his eyes was consuming the iris, bleeding into the whites. "You..." His voice sounded like grinding stones. "You smell... wrong." Celestia remained on the floor, calculating. The golden nightshade in his system was peaking. He wasn't seeing a laundry girl, he was seeing a threat, a hallucination. "I am no one, Alpha," she said softly, keeping her neck bared, a primal sign of submission. "Just a servant." "Liar!" Ragnar lunged. There was no time to think, no time for martial arts. He was simply too fast. His hand, heavy and hot as a branding iron, clamped around her throat. He lifted her off the ground as if she weighed nothing, slamming her against the rough stone wall. Stars exploded in Celestia's vision. Her feet kicked helplessly at the air. "Spy," he hissed, his face inches from hers. His breath reeked of rot. "Assassin, I can hear your heart. It's too slow. Why is it so slow?" His grip tightened. He was going to crush her windpipe. Celestia clawed at his wrist, but it was like clawing at granite. Her vision began to tunnel. She was going to die here, choked to death by a madman in a remote pack, her name forgotten. No. The refusal surged from the marrow of her bones. She had survived the palace. She had survived the escape. She would not die today. Her hand dropped from his wrist to her waist, finding the small, jagged shard of metal she had scavenged from the broken washing machine earlier. She didn't stab him. She slashed her own palm. A sharp sting, and then the warmth flowed. She jammed her bleeding hand directly onto Ragnar's open, snarling mouth. "Drink!" she commanded, her voice a strangled rasp. Ragnar recoiled, trying to bite her hand off, but the moment the first drop hit his tongue, he froze. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. Ragnar dropped her. He staggered back, clutching his throat, gagging. It wasn't the reaction of tasting blood, it was the reaction of tasting fire. Celestia collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, massaging her bruised throat. She watched, terrifyingly fascinated, as her blood went to work. Where the blood dripped from her hand onto the floor, it didn't pool red. It shimmered. Like mercury spilled under moonlight, it was a heavy silver liquid that seemed to pulse with its own light. Ragnar fell to his knees. The veins in his neck turned black, then flushed a pale, glowing silver. He threw his head back and screamed, a sound of agony but also of purging. The poison was being hunted. The quicksilver in her veins was an aggressive agent. It sought out the nightshade toxin, wrapping around the molecular structures and obliterating them. Slowly, the red drained from Ragnar's eyes. The claws retracted with sickening pops and cracks as bones reset. The animalistic hunch in his shoulders smoothed out. He slumped forward, panting heavily, sweat dripping from his nose. Silence returned to the room, heavier than before. Then another. Celestia scrambled backward, clutching her bleeding hand to her chest. She needed to bandage it. If anyone else saw the color of her blood. "What?" Ragnar rasped. He lifted his head. His eyes were clear. But for a split second, they weren't their natural brown. They flashed a brilliant, mirror-like silver. He looked at her. Really looked at her. And then he grabbed his chest, directly over his heart. Celestia gasped, her own hand flying to her chest. A phantom thud echoed in her ribcage. It wasn't her heartbeat. It was his. Strong, erratic, powerful. The bond. She had fed him her blood. In the old laws, that was a binding ritual. But with her bloodline, it was absolute. Ragnar stared at her, his pupils dilating. He could feel it too. The fear radiating off her. The sharp sting of the cut on her palm as if it were on his own hand. You aren't a beta, he whispered. He stood up, stumbling slightly, then finding his balance. The madness was gone, replaced by a cold, lethal clarity. And you aren't an omega? He moved toward her. This time, there was no frenzy, just the stalking approach of a predator who has found an anomaly. Celestia backed up until she hit the wall. Stay back. Ragnar didn't listen. He reached out, grabbing her injured hand. He stared at the silver liquid oozing from the cut. Quicksilver, he murmured, the word heavy with disbelief. The ghost stories are true. In a blur of motion, he pinned her against the wall again. But this time, a silver letter opener was pressed against her jugular. Give me one reason why I shouldn't mount your head on a pike right now, Ragnar growled. You're one of them. The royal freaks. If I were one of them, Celestia said, her voice steady despite the blade digging into her skin, you would be dead already. The nightshade would have finished you. Ragnar's grip didn't loosen. You cured it. Why? Because a dead alpha is of no use to me. Ragnar paused, his eyes narrowing. Use? You are being hunted, Ragnar, she said, using his name for the first time. The golden nightshade isn't a recreational drug. Someone is dosing you. Someone wants you mad, weak, and eventually dead. Probably so they can take this pack without a fight. The blade wavered slightly. Ragnar knew she was right. He had felt the weakness growing for months. I can stop the madness, Celestia pressed, seeing the opening. My blood neutralizes the toxin. I can brew the antidote if I have the ingredients, so we don't need direct transfer. And what is the price? Ragnar asked. A royal doesn't offer charity. Sanctuary. Celestia looked him in the eye. I am running from the king. If he finds me, I die. I need a place to disappear. I need a pack that won't ask questions. She took a breath, playing her final card. And I need you to protect the boy. Milo, Ragnar frowned. The cripple? The strategist, she corrected sharply. He saw the flaws in your northern defenses simply by looking at the trees. He has a mind for war that rivals the generals of the capital. Let me teach him. He will be your sword. I will be your shield against the poison. Ragnar stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. He could feel her heartbeat through the bond. It was terrified. Yes, but there was no deception. The bond didn't lie. He slowly pulled the blade away from her throat. He brought her bleeding hand up to his face. For a moment, Celestia thought he would kiss it. Instead, he licked the remaining silver blood from her palm, his tongue rough and hot. The jolt of pleasure and energy that shot through the bond made Celestia's knees buckle. Ragnar's eyes darkened, possessiveness flaring in his chest. Deal, he said, his voice rough. He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. But know this, little healer. If you betray me, if you lead the king to my door, I will be the first to rip out your throat, bond or no bond. Celestia met his gaze, the gold in her eyes threatening to surface before she tamped it down. If I betray you, Alpha, she whispered, I'll hand you the knife myself. Chapter 3. The Shadow Strategist. The wine cellar beneath the pack house had long been abandoned, smelling of cork rot, damp earth, and the ghosts of vintage reds. It was dark, cold, and perfect. Again, Celestia commanded softly. Milo sat on an overturned crate, his bad leg stretched out before him. In his hands he held a chunky, scavenged walkie-talkie. His eyes were squeezed shut, his head tilted slightly to the left. West perimeter, Milo whispered, his voice trembling with concentration. Patrol B is lagging. 2 minutes behind schedule. Their boots are dragging. They're tired. How do you know? Celestia asked, leaning against a wine rack, her arms crossed. The wind carries the sound of the gravel, Milo murmured, eyes still closed. Heavy steps, irregular rhythm, and I hear a lighter clicking, a loose clip on a rifle strap. He opened his eyes, looking at Celestia with a spark of excitement that hadn't been there a week ago. If I were an enemy, I'd strike the west gate in exactly 90 seconds. The guard shift change leaves a 12-second blind spot. Celestia nodded, a rare, faint smile touching her lips. Correct. She walked over to the makeshift table, a barrel covered in maps drawn on the back of laundry receipts. Muscles atrophy, Milo. Bones break. But this? She tapped his forehead. This is the only weapon that gets sharper with use. You aren't a cripple here. You are the architect. Milo looked down at his map, his charcoal-stained fingers tracing the lines of the terrain. For years he had been the pack's punching bag. Now, in the dim light of the cellar, he was beginning to feel like a god looking down on a chessboard. Does the Alpha know? Milo asked quietly. That we're doing this? He knows you have potential, Celestia lied smoothly. Ragnar knew she was teaching the boy, but he didn't know the extent. He didn't know she was teaching Milo royal tactics, codes, lip-reading, and the psychological dismantling of an enemy force. But potential means nothing without results. Keep listening to the wind. Nightfall brought a different kind of darkness. The Alpha's quarters were situated at the top of the main house, isolated and imposing. Inside, the air was always warmer than the rest of the building, heated by the massive stone fireplace and the sheer metabolic furnace of the Alpha himself. Ragnar sat on the edge of his bed, shirtless. The firelight danced across the landscape of scars on his torso, claw marks, bullet wounds, and the jagged white lines of old battles. Celestia stood between his knees, her fingers pressed against the pulse point of his neck. She wasn't using medical equipment. She didn't need to. The bond hummed between them like a high-tension wire. Thump, thump, thump. His heart was strong, steady. The frantic, irregular rhythm of the poison was gone, suppressed by the trace amounts of silver blood still circulating in his system. The headaches? Celestia asked, her voice professional, detached. Gone, Ragnar grunted. He wasn't looking at the wall. He was looking at her. At the way her eyelashes cast shadows on her pale cheeks, at the pulse fluttering in her own throat, a rabbit in the presence of a wolf. The hallucinations? Only when I sleep, he muttered. Celestia pulled her hand away, but Ragnar caught her wrist. His grip was firm, hot, and possessed a shocking gentleness for a man of his violence. What do you see? Celestia asked, her breath hitching. I don't see my nightmares anymore, Ragnar said, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating through her bones. I see yours. Celestia froze. The bond was a two-way street. If she could feel his physical pain, he could feel her psychological state. I see a cage, Ragnar whispered, his thumb tracing the blue vein on the inside of her wrist. Made of glass and gold? I see a man in a red cloak who smiles like a shark. And I feel cold. A cold so deep it burns. He pulled her half a step closer. The scent of her, hidden beneath the soap and bleach, that faint, impossible smell of snow and roses, was intoxicating. It triggered a primal instinct in his hindbrain. Mine, mate, protect. Who is he? Ragnar demanded softly. The man in the cloak. Celestia yanked her hand back, her heart hammering against her ribs. A ghost, nothing more. You lie. Ragnar stood up, towering over her. The space in the room suddenly felt very small. You smell of terror when I mention him. You saved my life, Celestia. That makes you mine to protect. Tell me his name and I will mount his head on my wall. You can't, she snapped, the fear cracking her stoic mask. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Ragnar. You are a strong Alpha, but he is an extinction event. She turned to leave, grabbing her medical bag. She needed to get out. The air was too thick, the bond too loud. She could feel his desire mixing with his aggression, and it was sparking a dangerous heat in her own blood. Celestia, he called out as she reached the door. She paused, hand on the latch. The nightshade is clearing, he said, his voice regaining that dangerous, commanding edge. My strength is returning. Soon I won't just be surviving. I'll be hunting. Good, she whispered, not looking back, because the hunters are already here. Vera watched from the shadows of the hallway alcove, her body pressed against the velvet drapes. She saw the laundry girl, the Omega trash, exit the Alpha's room. Her face was flushed, her breathing quick. Vera's fingernails dug into the windowsill, chipping the wood. For 2 years, Vera had played the role of the grieving fiancé perfectly. She had nursed Ragnar, while secretly dosing his wine with the nightshade her contact provided. She had kept the pack running. She had waited for him to finally succumb to the madness so she could step in as Regent Luna. And now? Ragnar was walking around the training grounds with his chest out, eyes clear. He was eating. He was healing. And it all started when this gray-eyed rat arrived. Vera turned and slinked away, her heels silent on the carpet. She headed not to her room, but to the servants' quarters in the basement. The door to Celestia's small, damp room had a flimsy lock. Vera picked it with a hairpin in 3 seconds. She slipped inside, wrinkling her nose at the smell of bleach. She tore the room apart. She ripped the mattress open, dumped the drawers, checked beneath the loose floorboards, nothing but rags and books. Frustrated, Vera kicked the pile of clothes. Something fluttered out from the pocket of a spare apron. It was a handkerchief, but not the coarse cotton the servants used. This was silk. Fine, double-woven silk. It was torn, stained with old blood, but the embroidery in the corner was intact. A silver crescent moon entwined with a rose. Vera stared at it. She didn't recognize the crest. It wasn't from any neighboring pack. It looked ancient, aristocratic. A slow, cruel smile spread across her red lips. She didn't need to know the truth. She only needed a lie that the pack would believe. She pocketed the silk and left the room. The next morning, the whispers started in the mess hall. It began with Vera's personal maid, a gossip with a loud voice, sitting at a crowded table. I'm telling you, the maid whispered loudly, leaning in. I saw it myself. Strange symbols under her bed. And the smell? Metallic. Like old copper. What are you saying? A warrior asked, pausing with his spoon halfway to his mouth. I'm saying, the maid lowered her voice theatrically, that the Alpha isn't getting better because of medicine. Have you noticed how pale that laundry girl is? How she never eats garlic? How the Alpha looks at her like he's obsessed? A murmur of unease rippled through the table. Werewolves were superstitious creatures. They feared what they couldn't smell or claw. Blood magic, the maid hissed. She's a blood slave. She's feeding him dark blood to bind his will to hers. That's why he didn't kill her for touching him. She's bewitched him. Across the mess hall, Vera sat at the high table, sipping her tea. She watched the rumor spread like a virus. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. Glares were cast toward the kitchen doors where Celestia was working. Vera smiled behind her teacup. You may have his blood, little rat, she thought. But I have his pack. Let's see how long you survive when the very people you're trying to save want to burn you at the stake. Chapter 4. The Trap. The tension in the mess hall was thicker than the porridge. Celestia felt the eyes on her back, dozens of them, pricking her skin like needles. The whispers stopped the moment she entered, replaced by a heavy, hostile silence. Witch, someone muttered under their breath. Blood whore, another hissed. Celestia kept her head down, gripping her tray until her knuckles turned white. She moved to the far corner, near the kitchen disposal, where Milo was already sitting. The boy looked smaller than usual, hunched over his notebook, his leg bouncing nervously. They're talking about you, Milo whispered without looking up. They say you're poisoning the Alpha's mind. Let them talk, Celestia said. though the cold knot in her stomach tightened. Words don't kill, Milo. Ignorance does. She broke her stale bread, dipping it into the watery broth. She tried to ignore the glare from the high table where Vera sat, peeling an apple with a paring knife, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips. Suddenly, the air shattered. Woo oop! Woo oop! The perimeter siren. It wasn't the rhythmic pulse of a drill. It was the continuous screaming wail of an imminent breach. North Gate! A sentry bellowed, bursting through the double doors, his chest heaving. Intruders! The mess hall erupted. Warriors vaulted over tables, shifting mid-air, fur bursting through clothes in showers of fabric. The sound of bones cracking and roars filled the room. Celestia grabbed Milo's arm. To the tower, now. From the vantage point of the watchtower, the northern border looked like a painting of chaos. But as Celestia brought the binoculars to her eyes, her breath hitched. Rogues don't move like that, she whispered. Usually rogue attacks were frenzied, starving wolves throwing themselves at the fence, howling and foaming. This was different. Emerging from the fog of the tree line was a phalanx. 30 wolves, massive and gray, moving in perfect lockstep. They didn't howl. They didn't growl. They moved in silence, a wave of gray death. They formed a wedge formation, aiming for the weak point in the gate's hinges. They're shielded, Milo said, his voice trembling as he adjusted the frequency on the tower's radio. Look at the spacing. They're covering each other's blind spots. Down below, the Blackthorn warriors charged out to meet them. It was a massacre. The Blackthorn wolves fought with passion and rage, but the intruders fought with math. The wedge formation absorbed the impact of the Blackthorn charge, then snapped shut like a steel trap. 3 Blackthorn wolves went down in seconds, throats torn out with surgical precision. They're breaking the line, Celestia shouted into her walkie-talkie. Where is Ragnar? South perimeter, came the static-filled reply. He's 3 miles out. He can't get back in time. Panic began to ripple through the Blackthorn ranks. The field commander, a brute named Kale, was roaring conflicting orders, leading his men into a bottleneck. Celestia looked at Milo. The boy was white as a sheet, his hands shaking so hard he almost dropped the radio mic. He was staring at the slaughter below, paralyzed. Milo, Celestia said, her voice cutting through the noise of the siren. He didn't respond. She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. Her eyes were hard, the gray storming with intensity. They say you are crippled. They say you are useless. She pointed at the battlefield where Kyle was leading 5 more wolves into a death trap. Prove them wrong. Be the architect. Milo swallowed hard. He looked at the map taped to the console, his map. He looked at the ravine he had circled in red charcoal weeks ago. He took a deep breath. His hand steadied. He pressed the button on the master microphone, overriding the local comms. His voice boomed over the camp loudspeakers, amplified and echoing off the mountains. Commander Kale, fall back! On the battlefield, the massive brown wolf that was Kale hesitated, looking up at the tower in confusion. Do not engage! Milo screamed, his voice cracking but authoritative. Sector 4 is a kill box. Fall back to the tree line, now! There was a moment of hesitation. The pack hated taking orders from the cripple. Then a roar tore through the psychic link, powerful enough to bring every wolf to their knees. It was Ragnar, projecting his voice across the miles through the Alpha bond. Obey the boy! The command was absolute. Kyle and the Blackthorn warriors scrambled backward, retreating from the open field toward the swampy tree line of Sector 4. The silent gray phalanx pursued instantly, sensing weakness. They surged forward, their formation tightening as they chased the retreating wolves into the narrow pass between 2 rocky outcrops. Wait for it, Milo whispered, his finger hovering over a red switch on the console. He watched the enemy wolves pour into the ravine. Wait for it. Celestia held her breath. The enemy was fully committed now, bottled up in the narrow pass. Now! Milo flipped the switch. High above the ravine, the magnetic locks on the logging nets released. Tons of massive timber logs and boulders, positioned there by the engineering team on Milo's maintenance orders last week, came crashing down. The sound was thunderous. The earth shook as the avalanche of wood and stone slammed into the ravine. The disciplined phalanx was crushed. The formation shattered. The silence of the enemy was finally broken by yelps and howls of pain. "Sector 4, engage!" Milo commanded. "Flank them from the ridge. They are trapped." The Blackthorn warriors, seeing their enemies pinned and panicked, howled in triumph. They dove from the ridges, turning the slaughter around. It was over in minutes. The smoke was still clearing as Celestia walked onto the battlefield. The stench of blood was overpowering. Blackthorn warriors were high-fiving, howling at the moon, clapping Milo on the back as he limped down from the tower. For the first time, they weren't looking at his leg. They were looking at him with awe. But Celestia wasn't celebrating. She walked toward the pile of enemy corpses being dragged into a heap for burning. Something was wrong. The discipline. The silence. It gnawed at her. She knelt beside one of the dead gray wolves. It had shifted back to human form in death, a naked, pale man with a shaved head. "Don't touch it, witch," Kale grunted, passing by. "Filthy rogues." Celestia ignored him. She pried open the dead man's jaw. She froze. The tongue was gone, not torn out in battle, surgically removed, scar tissue where the root should be. They were silenced so they couldn't talk. Her trembling fingers moved down to the man's shoulder. There, hidden beneath a layer of dirt, was a tattoo. It was small, barely the size of a coin, but to Celestia it screamed. A black sun eclipsed by a red drop of blood. The crest of the Royal Eclipse Unit. The King's personal death squad. Used for off-the-books operations. "No," she breathed, the world tilting on its axis. This wasn't a rogue attack. This wasn't a random raid. This was a stress test. A shadow fell over her. Ragnar stood there, back in human form, sweat and blood streaking his chest. He had run the 3 miles in record time. He looked from the corpse to Celestia's terrified face. "What is it?" he demanded, his voice low so the others wouldn't hear. "You know who they are." Celestia stood up, wiping her hands on her apron, but she couldn't wipe away the cold dread seeping into her bones. "They weren't trying to take the pack, Ragnar," she whispered, her voice hollow. "Then what were they doing?" "They were measuring your response time," she said, looking at the carnage. "They were testing your defenses, seeing how long it takes for you to bleed." She looked up at the watchtower, where Milo was smiling, basking in his first victory. "The king knows," Celestia said, tears stinging her eyes. "He didn't send an army to kill us. He sent a scouting party." She turned to Ragnar, her gray eyes wide with a frantic warning. "He's playing a game, Ragnar, and he just finished the first round." Ragnar looked down at the branded tattoo. He didn't understand the full political weight, but he understood the threat. He reached out, his hand heavy on her shoulder, grounding her. "Then we prepare for the second," he growled, but Celestia shook her head. She knew her brother. She knew the way Kaiser thought. He wouldn't send another army. That was too crude, too boring. He will target what matters. Her gaze drifted back to Milo, laughing with the guards. The heart. "We don't have time to prepare," Celestia whispered. "He's already made his next move." Chapter 5. The Devil's Choice. The victory feast was a roar of firelight and adrenaline. In the center of the camp, a massive bonfire licked the night sky, sending sparks drifting up toward the stars. The scent of roasting venison and spiced ale hung heavy in the air, masking the earlier stench of death. For the first time in months, the Blackthorn pack was laughing. Celestia stood in the shadows of the mess hall porch, leaning against a wooden pillar. She held a mug of cider she hadn't touched. Her eyes tracked Milo. The boy was sitting on a log near the fire, surrounded by a gaggle of younger pups and impressed sentries. He was gesturing wildly, reenacting the moment the rockslide crushed the enemy. His face, usually pale and drawn, was flushed with the intoxicating warmth of acceptance. "He looks happy," a deep voice rumbled beside her. Celestia didn't jump. She felt Ragnar's presence through the bond before she heard him. It was a low, steady hum in the back of her mind. "He is happy," Celestia corrected softly. "He has a purpose. That is a powerful drug." Ragnar took a swig from a heavy tankard. He wore a fresh linen shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He looked healthy. Dangerous. A king in his own right. "And you?" Ragnar asked, turning his dark gaze on her. "Do you have a purpose, Celestia?" "Survival," she answered automatically. "That is not a purpose," Ragnar countered, stepping closer. The heat radiating off him defied the chill of the night wind. "That is an instinct. Rats survive. Queens rule." Celestia stiffened. "I am no queen, Ragnar. I am a fugitive." "Keep telling yourself that," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. For a moment, the noise of the party faded. The bond pulled at them, magnetic and undeniable. 50 yards away, in the bustle of the outdoor kitchen tent, Vera watched the tender scene with cold, reptilian eyes. She reached into her bodice and pulled out a small, lead-lined vial. It was heavy, cold to the touch. Earlier that evening, a carrier pigeon had arrived at her window. No message. Just the vial and a single black feather dipped in gold paint. The king's sign. The order was implicit. Flush her out. Vera looked at the tray of honey-glazed sweet buns being prepared for the children. A traditional victory treat for the pups who were too young to drink ale. "A pity," Vera whispered to herself. She uncorked the vial. The liquid inside was clear but viscous. It didn't smell like poison. It smelled like sulfur and chili pepper. Inferno. She poured the entire contents over the tray of buns. The glaze absorbed it instantly. "Take these to the children," Vera ordered a passing servant, her voice sweet as syrup. They've waited patiently. The scream didn't sound human. It didn't sound like a wolf, either. It sounded like a tea kettle screaming as it boiled dry. Celestia dropped her mug. Cider splashed onto her boots. Near the fire, a young girl, no older than 6, dropped her sweet bun. She clawed at her throat, her eyes bulging. "Mama!" she shrieked, but the word bubbled in her throat. Then another child fell. Then 3 more. Panic detonated in the camp. Music stopped. Laughter died in throats. "My skin! It burns!" Milo screamed, falling off his log. He clutched his stomach, curling into a ball. "Milo!" Celestia lunged forward, but Ragnar was faster. He grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. But then, Ragnar stumbled. He fell to one knee, a roar of sympathetic agony tearing from his throat. As the Alpha, he felt the pain of his pack. And right now, 20 of his most vulnerable subjects were dying in excruciating torment. "Poison!" The pack healer, an elder wolf named Silas, rushed to the children. He poured water over the girl's face. It was the wrong move. The moment the water touched her skin, steam hissed up. The girl screamed louder, her skin turning a furious, blistered red. "Don't touch them!" Celestia shouted, trying to pull away from Ragnar. "It's thermal reactive!" "What is happening?" Ragnar groaned, his eyes flashing red as he fought the phantom pain burning his insides. He didn't let go of her arm. "Inferno!" Celestia hissed, her face pale. "It raises the blood temperature until it boils within the veins. It cooks them from the inside out." "Fix it!" a mother screamed, clutching her dying child. "Silas, fix it!" Silas looked up, his hands shaking, helpless terror in his eyes. I don't know what this is. My magic. It's not working. They are burning up. The screams were becoming a singular, high-pitched wail of pure suffering. Celestia looked at the children. Steam was beginning to rise from their open mouths. Their veins stood out like black ropes against their skin. She looked at Milo. The boy was convulsing, blood trickling from his nose. His eyes locked with hers, filled with betrayal and plea. "Help me." Celestia turned to Ragnar. "Let me go. I can save them." Ragnar looked at her. Through the bond she felt his agony, but she also felt his terror. Not for the pups, but for her. "No," Ragnar gritted out, his voice a low growl only she could hear. He tightened his grip on her wrist, pulling her back into the shadows behind the pillar. "Ragnar, they are dying!" "If you step out there," Ragnar whispered, his face twisted in pain, "if you use your blood, the spies will see. The king will know." He shook his head, sweat dripping from his brow. "You said it yourself. He is extinction. If he finds you, he kills you. He kills all of us." Ragnar's eyes were pleading. "Don't do it. Don't throw your life away. Silence is safety." Celestia looked at the dying children. She looked at Vera, who stood by the ale barrels, feigning shock, but watching Celestia with a hawk's intensity. Waiting. It was a trap. A cruel, sadistic trap designed to leverage her humanity against her survival. If I save them, I enter the cage. If I let them die, I am no better than the monster who sits on the throne. Milo's scream cut through the air again, weaker this time. "Celestia!" Something inside her snapped. It was the chain that had bound her since birth. The chain of fear. The chain of self-preservation. She looked down at Ragnar, the alpha who would let his pack die to keep his mate. It was a twisted form of love. But it was love. "You want to protect me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Always," Ragnar choked out. "But you can't protect me from myself." She violently ripped her arm from his grasp. The force of it surprised him, and he fell back against the pillar. "Celestia, no!" She stepped out of the shadows. The firelight caught her face. She didn't look like a laundry maid anymore. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted. The fear in her scent vanished, replaced by a cold, regal fury. She looked at the weeping mothers, the useless healer, the dying children. "I would rather die like a queen," she said, her voice carrying over the screams, "than live hiding like a rat while my people burn." She marched toward the center of the chaos. Vera's smile widened in the darkness. "Got you." Celestia didn't care. She reached into her apron and pulled out the iron dagger she kept for cutting bandages. She stopped over the bonfire. She held her left arm out over the flames. "Everyone back," she commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an order. She slashed the dagger down the length of her forearm. Deep, vertical, a suicide cut. But the blood didn't drip. It sprayed into the fire. And as the silver liquid hit the flames, it didn't burn. It exploded into a mist. A glittering, heavy, mercury-colored fog that rolled out from the fire like a shockwave, engulfing the screaming children, the weeping mothers, and the stunned warriors. The scent of blood rose and snow flooded the camp, overpowering the smell of burning flesh. Chapter 6. The Uncrowned Queen. The silence that followed was louder than the screams. The silver mist didn't behave like smoke. It behaved like a living organism. It rolled over the convulsing bodies of the children, heavy and cool, sinking into their pores. Where the mist touched the angry, boiled red skin, the redness vanished. Milo gasped, a sharp intake of breath that sounded like a drowning man breaking the surface. The steam rising from his skin dissipated. The blisters on his arms didn't just heal. They reversed, knitting back into smooth, unblemished skin in seconds. Around the fire, 20 children went limp, falling into a deep, restorative sleep. Celestia stood amidst the swirling fog, her left arm dripping silver onto the dirt. She swayed slightly. The blood loss was significant, but the drain on her energy was worse. The Quicksilver wasn't just blood, it was her essence. She looked up. Hundreds of eyes were staring at her. Fear, awe, confusion. Silas, the healer, was on his knees, his hands trembling as he touched the healed skin of the girl nearest him. He looked at Celestia as if she were a deity descended from the stars. "Impossible," he whispered. "Silver." Celestia closed her eyes for a moment. "It is done. The cage is open. Kill her!" The shriek tore through the trance. It came from the edge of the circle. Vera. The spy wasn't looking at the miracle. She was looking at the threat. She saw the pack wavering, saw the adoration dawning in their eyes. If Celestia lived past this night, Vera's ambition of becoming Luna was dust. "She's a witch!" Vera screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. "She's poisoning them! Kill the witch!" But no one moved. The warriors were paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of what they had just witnessed. Vera realized she was alone, and she realized this was her only chance. With a snarl of pure malice, Vera's body contorted. Bones cracked and reshaped in a blur of fur. Where the woman stood, a large, russet-colored wolf now crouched. She didn't hesitate. She launched herself. It was a cowardly attack, aimed at Celestia's exposed back while she was weakened. "No!" Ragnar's roar shook the ground. He was already moving, sprinting from the shadows of the porch. He shifted mid-stride, his clothes shredding as the massive black alpha wolf burst forth. But the distance was too great. Time seemed to slow down for Ragnar. He could see the trajectory. He could see Vera's jaws gaping open, aiming for Celestia's neck. He could see the saliva flying from Vera's fangs. "I can't reach her." The thought was a dagger in his heart. After all the wars, after all the survival, he was going to watch his salvation die 3 feet from his claws. Celestia turned. She didn't brace for impact. She didn't raise her hands to defend herself. She didn't look like a laundry maid or a healer or even a victim. The ash-gray contact lenses in her eyes seemed to dissolve. Beneath them, her irises flared with a light that had not been seen in the wolf world for 3 centuries. It wasn't the red of an alpha or the yellow of a beta. It was gold. Pure, molten, royal gold. The air pressure in the clearing dropped so sharply that ears popped. The fire in the pit was instantly extinguished, snuffed out by a vacuum of sheer power. Celestia didn't shout. She didn't need to. She spoke a single word, imbued with the ancient weight of the imperial decree. A biological command written into the DNA of every wolf since the dawn of their species. "Kneel." The word hit the air like a physical shockwave. It wasn't a suggestion. It was gravity. Vera, mid-air and inches from Celestia's throat, was slammed downward as if a giant invisible hand had swatted a fly. Crack. The sound of Vera hitting the packed earth was sickening. It was followed by the wet, sharp sounds of multiple bones shattering under the sheer crushing weight of the command. The russet wolf whimpered once, then lay flat, pinned to the dirt, unable to twitch a muscle. But it wasn't just Vera. Every warrior in the clearing collapsed. Knees hit the dirt in unison, a ripple of submission spreading outward from Celestia. Even Ragnar, the alpha of Blackthorn, the mad wolf, the unbreakable warrior. He skidded to a halt, fighting the command with every ounce of his will. His claws dug furrows into the earth. His muscles screamed in protest. He growled, his alpha pride warring with the biological imperative. But the gold gaze locked onto him. Ragnar whined, a sound of confusion and awe, and his front legs buckled. He lowered his massive head until his snout touched the dirt. Silence. Absolute, terrifying silence. The only sound was the wind rustling the leaves and the faint dripping of silver blood from Celestia's fingertips. Celestia stood alone in the center of a sea of bowed heads. She breathed heavily, the golden light in her eyes pulsing with the beat of her heart. She looked at Vera, broken and whining in the dust. She looked at Ragnar, forced into submission against his will. The tragedy of it washed over her. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't wanted to be a goddess or a monster. She had just wanted to be free. "I am Celestia," she whispered, her voice carrying clearly in the unnatural silence. "Daughter of the first line, carrier of the Quicksilver." She stepped over Vera's broken body, not sparing her a second glance. She walked to Ragnar. The black wolf trembled as she approached. The power radiating off her was suffocating. It smelled of ozone, deep snow, and the terrifying sweetness of blood roses. Celestia placed her uninjured hand on top of Ragnar's lowered head. "Rise, Ragnar," she murmured softly, releasing him from the decree. "You are not my servant." Ragnar slowly lifted his head. He shifted back, the bones rearranging until he was a man again, kneeling in the dirt, naked and shivering. Not from cold, but from the aftershock of pure power. He looked up at her. The anger was gone. The madness was gone. In his dark eyes there was only a profound, terrifying realization of what he had been sleeping beside. "You," Ragnar rasped, his voice hoarse. "You are the queen." Celestia looked at the moon above, her golden eyes slowly fading back to gray as the adrenaline waned. "No," she said, a tear tracing a path through the dirt on her cheek. "I am the prey, and I just rang the dinner bell." Chapter 7. Gilded Cage and Chains. The night was too quiet. It was the silence of a held breath. In the Alpha's quarters, the fire had died down to glowing embers. Ragnar sat on the edge of the bed, a bowl of warm water and a clean cloth in his hands. He was cleaning the long, vertical slash on Celestia's forearm. He did it with a reverence that made Celestia's chest ache. His large, calloused hands that had torn throats and broken bones, were trembling slightly as he dabbed away the dried silver flakes. "It will scar," Celestia whispered, breaking the heavy silence. "Good," Ragnar rumbled, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't look up. "Let it be a reminder that you bled for them, that you are who you are." He finished bandaging the wound and finally met her gaze. The aggression of the Alpha was gone, replaced by a fierce, desperate devotion. "We leave at dawn," Ragnar said firmly. "I have safe houses in the mountains, the eastern peaks. The snow is deep there, the scents don't carry. We can hide." Celestia reached out, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. Through the bond, she could feel his hope. It was a fragile, frantic thing. He was planning a future because he couldn't bear to look at the present. "Ragnar," she said softly. "No." He grabbed her hand, pressing it against his chest, over the thundering beat of his heart. "I don't care about the prophecy. I don't care about the throne. You are my mate. The bond is sealed. No one takes you from me." "He isn't just someone, Ragnar," Celestia said, her voice cracking. "He is the storm." She leaned in, resting her forehead against his. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to run into the mountains and live in a cabin and forget she was a monster's sister. But she could already feel the pressure in the air changing, the barometer dropping. "Promise me something," she whispered. "Anything. If it comes to a choice, between me and the pack, choose the pack." Ragnar pulled back, his eyes flashing with stubborn fire. "I choose you." Celestia smiled sadly. "That is why you are a good man, Ragnar, and that is why you will lose. Dawn did not bring the sun. It brought the crows. They came first as a sound, a rushing wind that sounded like a tempest. Then the sky above Blackthorn turned black. Thousands of birds, a swirling vortex of feathers and caws, blotted out the morning light. They descended on the trees, the roofs, the fence lines, watching with beady, intelligent eyes. Then came the vibration, Thrum. 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 The ground shook. Pebbles danced on the dirt. Celestia stood on the porch of the Alpha house, clutching her bandaged arm. She didn't need to see them to know they were there. She could smell them. The scent of ozone, polished steel, and cold, sterile perfection. "Perimeter breach!" Kyle screamed from the gate. But there was no fighting. The Blackthorn warriors, still recovering from the night's events, rushed to the fence only to stop dead. Surrounding the valley was a wall of black. The Royal Army, the Eclipse Legion, 5,000 soldiers in matte black tactical armor, standing perfectly still, silent as graves. They didn't growl, they didn't shift. They simply existed as a blockade of inevitable death. The main gate groaned as the electronic locks were overridden. The heavy iron doors swung open. A single vehicle entered. It was an armored carriage, sleek and black, with gold trim and bulletproof glass, tinted so dark it looked like obsidian. It moved silently, the engine purring like a large cat. It rolled through the mud of the camp, stopping 20 yards from where Celestia stood. Ragnar stepped in front of her. A ripple of bone-snapping transformation tore through him. He didn't just shift. He exploded into his wolf form. The massive black wolf, larger than any other in the pack, planted his paws in the mud. He lowered his head, a growl tearing from his chest that vibrated in the teeth of every wolf present. "You do not pass." The carriage door opened. A boot made of polished dragonhide leather stepped onto the mud. Then a leg in sharp, pressed black trousers. Then a military coat with gold epaulets. Finally, a cloak of deep, blood-red velvet spilled out. The Alpha King stood up. Kaiser. He was breathtaking. He possessed the same ethereal, pale beauty as Celestia. But where she was soft, he was sharp. His cheekbones could cut glass. His hair was a cascade of white gold, tied back with a silk ribbon. And his eyes. They were the same royal gold as Celestia's, but they lacked warmth. They were the gold of a coin, cold and hard. He ignored the giant black wolf snarling 5 feet from his face. He looked past Ragnar, directly at Celestia. He smiled. The temperature in the clearing seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You look thin, sister," Kaiser said. His voice was smooth, melodic, like a cello played in an empty hall. "The country air does not suit you." Ragnar lunged. It was a kill strike. Ragnar moved faster than the eye could follow, aiming for the king's throat. Kaiser didn't move. He didn't even blink. He simply raised one gloved finger. Click. Hundreds of red laser dots appeared instantly. They didn't aim at Ragnar. They aimed at the mess hall porch, at Milo, at the 20 children who had been healed the night before, at the mothers holding them. Ragnar froze midair, his claws inches from the king's face. He landed heavily, his paws skidding in the mud. He looked back. Every child had a red dot on their forehead. Milo had 3 on his chest. "A simple calculation," Kaiser said, dusting an invisible speck of dirt from his sleeve. "I have 12 snipers with high-velocity silver rounds for every pup in this litter. I can burn this entire pack to the ground in, shall we say 5 minutes?" He looked at Ragnar, his expression one of mild boredom. "Or," Kaiser continued, "you can return my property, and I will grant these dogs the privilege of living another day." Ragnar vibrated with rage. The sound coming from his throat was a high-pitched whine of impotence. He wanted to tear the king apart. He wanted to burn the world, but he could smell the silver bullets loaded in the rifles. He could hear the heartbeats of the terrified children. "He has checkmated us." Celestia stepped out from behind the giant wolf. "Let them live," she said, her voice steady, though her hands were shaking. "Celestia, no!" Ragnar's voice echoed in her mind through the bond, frantic and broken. "We fight. We die together." "That is a selfish death, my love," she whispered back. She walked past Ragnar. She paused for a single second, placing her hand on his massive, heaving snout. She leaned down, pressing a kiss to the coarse black fur. "Turn this pain into power," she projected into his mind, pouring all her love and sorrow into the thought. "Don't die. Grow strong. Wait for me." She pulled away. Kaiser held out his hand. His skin was pale, his fingers long and elegant. "Come, Liebling," he purred. "We have so much to discuss. Your little vacation has been very educational." Celestia walked toward him. Every step felt like walking to the gallows. She reached the carriage. She didn't take his hand. She climbed in unaided, her back straight, her dignity the only armor she had left. Kaiser chuckled, a low, dark sound. He turned to Ragnar, who was shaking violently, fighting the urge to shift and scream. "Guard her well for me," Kaiser mocked, looking at the empty spot where Celestia had stood. "Oh, wait. You failed at that, didn't you?" He stepped into the carriage. The heavy door slammed shut with the finality of a coffin lid. Inside, the carriage was a world of plush velvet and the scent of expensive wine. The sound of the outside world was cut off instantly. Celestia sat on the bench, staring straight ahead. She refused to look at him. Kaiser sat opposite her. He crossed his legs elegantly. He reached into a cooler and poured a glass of dark red wine. He leaned forward, invading her personal space. He reached out, his cold fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear. His touch lingered on her neck, right over her pulse. It was possessive, intimate, sick. "You have no idea how much I missed you," he whispered, his golden eyes burning with an obsession that went far beyond sibling affection. "The palace is so quiet without your heartbeat to listen to." He pressed the wine glass into her trembling hand. "Drink, Celestia." She took the glass. She looked out the tinted window. The carriage began to roll. Through the dark glass, she saw Ragnar shift back to human form. He was screaming. She couldn't hear the sound, but she saw his head thrown back, his mouth open in a roar of pure, unadulterated agony. Milo and the warriors were holding him back, dragging him away from the wheels. Celestia looked away. A single tear fell into the wine. "Welcome back to your gilded cage, my beloved sister," Kaiser said softly, raising his own glass in a toast to her misery. "This time I'll make sure the chains are tight enough that you never leave me again."